Gene Hackman wasn't just a Hollywood icon, he was a powerhouse. With iconic performances in The French Connection and Unforgiven, he left an indelible mark on cinema history. Yet after dominating the screen for over 40 years, he disappeared quietly. No farewell tour, no retrospective celebrations, just a sudden, lingering absence. Beneath that silence lies a story of guarded secrets, fractured relationships, and a life deliberately kept in the shadows. In this video, we reveal the startling truth behind Gene Hackman's mysterious passing, the hidden financial troubles he left behind, and why Hollywood, even his own family, appears to have wiped away his legacy. Was it just the inevitability of old age? Or is there a deeper, more unsettling secret at play? If you're intrigued, drop a 1 in the comments. If not, leave a 0. And make sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell for more jaw-dropping revelations. Gene Hackman's daughter now speaks in cryptic, haunting tones, as if uncovering the fading echoes of a titan who once dominated Hollywood. No outpouring of grief, no tearful homage. Leslie Hackman's unsettling, detached response sent ripples through a family already on edge, igniting speculation and drawing relentless reporters like vultures to a long-hidden truth. Hackman was discovered lifeless in a cold, empty home, the air heavy with toxic fumes. Yet the real shock wasn't his death. It was the 2 decades of silence, broken the moment Leslie finally broke hers. The daughter who once stayed hidden now stands at the center of a storm. Yet instead of mourning, her words pierce like knives, unraveling a harsh reality no one wanted to confront. Leslie Hackman isn't honoring Gene Hackman's legacy. She's dismantling it, reducing it to a shadow of its former glory. Beneath her cold stare and cryptic remarks lies a chilling secret, one that could rewrite everything we believed about her father. Gene Hackman, once a towering giant of Hollywood, captivated audiences with iconic roles in The French Connection, Unforgiven, Bonnie and Clyde, and Superman. His image adorned prestigious magazine covers, he commanded red carpets beneath flashing cameras, and he basked in the admiration of millions. Yet after 2004, he vanished. No farewell tour, no heartfelt retirement speech, no final curtain call. He never reappeared at award shows or faced the press again. It was as if a cinematic legend had simply dissolved, his name now echoing only in nostalgic retrospectives and lists of stars from a vanished golden age. He pulled back even more, allowing time to quietly blur his once brilliant legacy from Hollywood's glaring spotlight. In search of peace, Hackman and his wife, Betsy Arakawa, 31 years his junior, retreated to Santa Fe, New Mexico. Their $3.8 million sanctuary, nestled among the mountains, became their entire world. No red carpets, no paparazzi. Just the 2 of them, 3 devoted dogs, and the gentle, unhurried passage of days, far removed from the clamor of stardom. Neighbors in Santa Fe seldom saw Hackman outside in the mornings. Instead, he sat quietly on his porch, coffee in hand, gazing out at the distant mountains. The imposing figure once commanding the screen in a sheriff's uniform had softened into that of a weary old man, his sunken eyes heavy with untold stories. His days felt like a faded film caught in slow motion, each memory, each forgotten scene flickering behind his closed eyes, replaying in a ceaseless loop of a past that refused to let go. Betsy Arakawa, once viewed with doubt by Hackman's family, became the one who stayed by his side the longest. She cared for him with the attentiveness of a dedicated nurse, making sure every pill was taken, every meal prepared. But was her commitment genuine, unconditional love? Or was Betsy, like their isolated Santa Fe home, a refuge on the outside, yet a silent prison where Hackman's loneliness quietly deepened, unseen and unescapable? Close friends who visited Hackman observed a striking transformation after his retreat from Hollywood. He spoke little, steered clear of discussing his career, and never revisited his own films. Any new scripts that managed to reach him were quickly dismissed, often by Betsy before he even had a chance to see them. In a rare interview, Hackman confessed, "I haven't watched my films in years. They're part of the past. They don't belong to me anymore." For 20 years, from 2004 to 2024, Hackman existed like a ghost. His once powerful presence reduced to a distant memory. His name spoken only with a sense of nostalgia. No lavish galas, no red carpets, no interviews. The world caught a rare glimpse of him in 2023 when paparazzi captured a photo of Hackman and Betsy at a modest seafood restaurant. He appeared frail, his frame thinner, his steps unsteady as he leaned on his wife's arm. Yet in that brief moment, the same sharp intensity that electrified the French Connection still flickered beneath the weight of time. Neighbors remember Hackman's house as mostly closed off, its stillness rarely disturbed. Yet on some late nights, muffled arguments seeped through the walls, fragments of tension no one could fully discern. All they knew was that Betsy always seemed to have the last word. An unsettling aura clung to the home, an unspoken heaviness that made passers-by uneasy, as if the very walls guarded secrets too burdensome to be exposed. For 21 years, Gene Hackman and Betsy Arakawa disappeared from the public eye, their absence a velvet curtain that concealed the final chapter of a storied career while fueling endless speculation. Some believed Hackman fell into a deep depression after stepping away from the spotlight, while others whispered that Betsy kept him isolated, quietly managing his fortune from behind closed doors. Whatever the truth, Hackman seemed to embrace the silence, as if he were deliberately erasing his own name from Hollywood's legacy. In Hollywood, disappearing didn't mean being forgotten, but for Hackman, it was a deliberate act. He refused interviews, ignored invitations, and even declined a Lifetime Achievement Oscar. To many, it was a mystery. Why would a man who dedicated his life to his craft turn his back on it so completely? His silence wasn't just a retreat. It felt like a warning. No one who spent 4 decades under the spotlight could vanish without a trace. What was he hiding? A buried family secret? A shocking will? Or a pain so profound that not even his first wife, Faye Maltese, or his 3 children ever uncovered the truth? When the late-night call came from the Santa Fe police, reporting 2 lifeless bodies found in separate rooms and a mysteriously deceased dog, the quiet suspicions that had hovered for 21 years erupted into a frenzy. Gene Hackman, once a towering Hollywood legend, was now just a name on a coroner's report. The silence that had enveloped his final years had been merely a prelude to something darker, a twisted tragedy that left his daughter, Leslie Ann Hackman, trembling as she gripped his will, tears streaming down her face. The winding dirt roads leading to Gene Hackman's isolated estate on the outskirts of Santa Fe held an eerie, almost forgotten stillness. Unlike the sunlit glamour of California or the brisk air of the East Coast, the high desert sun seemed tired, its faded light more a silent observer than a source of warmth, patiently waiting for something to fracture and fall apart. Perched on a solitary hill, Gene Hackman's million-dollar estate loomed quietly, a fortress of secrets no one dared to breach. Neighbors rarely saw the couple. No leisurely walks, no weekend get-togethers, no appearances at the local church or bustling farmers' markets. When Gene and Betsy did appear, they were only fleeting shadows, slipping past watchful eyes before disappearing behind the imposing iron gate. They say that at dawn, just as the sun began to edge over the mountains, Betsy would quietly step outside with the aging dog. She moved carefully, her gaze sweeping the still, empty landscape, as if wary of unseen eyes. The dog's slow, labored steps seemed to carry the weight of an unspoken burden hanging heavy in the air. Less than 15 minutes later, she would return, gently latching the gate behind her, her touch light and almost cautious, as if afraid to rouse the restless ghosts that haunted Gene Hackman's home. As Gene Hackman's heart weakened, his world shrank to the narrow confines of his home. The only outsider permitted inside was a middle-aged delivery woman, her face lined with quiet sorrow. She never lingered, speaking just a few brief words before leaving. Once, in a low voice, she confided to a neighbor, "They're hiding something big that no one knows." Betsy Arakawa, guarded and intensely private, kept the outside world at a distance. Beyond Gene, she had no close connections, only the heavy, lingering silence that clung to their secluded home like a shadow. Yet a neighbor living just beyond Hackman's fence noticed something strange. Betsy often made hushed phone calls in the backyard. Her voice was too low to fully catch, but now and then fragments drifted through the trees. "He's getting worse. No, we can't let anyone know. This house isn't safe." Every call ended the same way, with a long, weary sigh as if she carried an unbearable burden. Who was on the other end? A family member? Or someone privy to the Hackman family's most guarded secrets? No one knew. But as the calls grew more frequent, the worry etched on Betsy's face only seemed to deepen. Gene Hackman's home, once praised by the media as an architectural gem hidden in the wilderness, carried a persistent, unsettling chill for anyone who entered. It wasn't the desert air or the house's design, it was a deeper, unspoken sorrow that seemed to seep from every corner. The walls were covered with framed photos, yet not a single one showed Hackman's 3 biological children. Instead, only images of him and Betsy filled the space, a meticulously curated collection of their shared memories, as if the past had been deliberately erased. Hackman's children, once heard laughing and playing in the backyard of his Los Angeles home, had long vanished from his life. He never publicly discussed his health, but quiet rumors among neighbors painted a bleak picture: heart disease, arthritis, spinal degeneration. Yet the most haunting ailment wasn't physical. It was the slow, creeping curse that shadowed Hollywood's aging legends. From Marlon Brando to Katharine Hepburn and Greta Garbo, the greatest icons of the Golden Age faced the same cruel fate, fading into obscurity while still alive. For Hackman, a former box office giant whose name once guaranteed success, becoming just a forgotten footnote in film history may have been the most devastating illness of all. Betsy once confided in a neighbor during a rare conversation, "Gene doesn't watch his old films. He says they belong to another life." With those words, Hackman severed his last connection to Hollywood, leaving his past behind like a discarded script. Yet every night, as the house fell into silence, Betsy would glimpse him standing by the bedroom window, staring out at the distant mountains, quietly murmuring to himself. Those whispers weren't just the wind or fleeting illusions. They were fragments of unfinished conversations between Gene Hackman and the man he used to be, the one who once commanded the screen, convinced his reign would never end. But when the doors closed and Hollywood's glow dimmed, all that remained was an aging man, lost in his million-dollar home. Beyond the iron gates, the world moved on, unaware that Gene Hackman still lingered, his whispers the last fading echoes of a legend yearning to be remembered. The once secluded million-dollar estate in the New Mexico hills, a sanctuary that had hidden whispered secrets and late-night phone calls, now stands as a haunting crime scene. Red and blue police lights flash against the adobe walls, casting ghostly shadows across the quiet desert night. Neighbors gather behind wooden fences, their murmurs mingling with the wind, trying to make sense of the mystery unfolding inside a home that had been silent for so long. The police weren't drawn by frantic calls or desperate screams, only by an unsettling stillness that had settled over the house. It was the drug dealer, a weary-faced woman from down the road, who noticed it first. That unshakable stench. Not just decay, not just chemicals, but something far more unsettling. A suffocating odor that clung to the air, a silent warning that whatever lay inside had been waiting to be discovered. When the door creaked open, investigators weren't met with the chaos of a violent crime scene, but something far more unsettling. Absolute, suffocating silence. Gene Hackman and Betsy Arakawa lay in separate rooms, their bodies in different poses, yet united by the same eerie stillness. Hackman rested on his back atop the bed, the blanket carefully pulled up to his chest, as if he had simply slipped into sleep after a long, exhausting day. His eyes were closed, his mouth slightly open. No bruises, no signs of struggle, no visible pain. Just the haunting stillness of a man who had quietly slipped away, leaving only silence behind. Just a few steps away, Betsy Arakawa was slumped beside the bed, her body frozen in an unsettling final moment. One hand still gripped the landline phone, an artifact from the early years of their life in the house. The screen displayed no record of an outgoing or incoming call. Had she tried to reach someone? Had she realized, too late, that something was terribly wrong? Her vacant eyes remained fixed on the window, where the last traces of evening light clung to the horizon, as if she had been staring at something just beyond the glass, when death quietly claimed her. When the police arrived, Gene and Betsy's 3 dogs were still inside. 2 of them were alive, trembling near their owners' lifeless bodies, their eyes red and weary, reflecting a fear they couldn't understand. But the oldest dog, the one Betsy walked each morning, lay dead in the hallway between the 2 bedrooms. There were no signs of struggle, no blood, no visible wounds. It appeared to have simply laid down and never risen again. But why did 2 survive while 1 did not? Was the gas not potent enough to kill them all, or had something occurred before the fumes filled the house? A tragic accident, or a calculated decision? The forensic team meticulously examined the heating system, gas lines, and appliances, searching for the source of the deadly fumes. What they found sent a chill through the investigation. No carbon monoxide leaks, no malfunctioning stoves, no faulty wiring. The toxic gas that had filled the house hadn't resulted from any natural failure. Then came the most disturbing revelation. traces of hydrogen sulfide, a poisonous gas with a sickening stench of rotten eggs, yet nearly undetectable in low concentrations. But where had it come from? It wasn't seeping from the plumbing or rising from the drains. Instead, the evidence suggested something far more sinister. It had been introduced deliberately, either from outside the house or, more disturbingly, from within. Gene Hackman died without a single mark on his body. No struggle, no sign of distress. Betsy Arakawa met the same fate, but with one haunting difference. She died clutching the phone, as if desperately trying to reach someone. Could their deaths have been orchestrated to appear as a tragic accident, a simple gas leak? Yet the presence of hydrogen sulfide, a gas that had no place in their home, challenged that notion. Questions stacked like the unseen walls that had concealed their secluded lives. Who first noticed the fumes? Did Gene slip away first? Or did Betsy witness his final moments before succumbing herself? And in those last, desperate seconds, who had she tried to call? If this was murder, it wasn't impulsive. It was cold, calculated, and executed by someone who knew how to turn silence into a weapon. The bitter twist of fate was that Gene Hackman's children, despite their estrangement from their father, had long braced themselves for the inevitable. At 94, his passing felt like a matter of time. Yet no one expected it to unfold this way. No one foresaw that Betsy, 3 decades his junior, would be taken too. A woman who should have been organizing his farewell, not joining him in it. Had they remained a close-knit couple, or had they quietly drifted apart within the cavernous, isolated mansion? What were the last words they shared? Were Betsy's whispered phone calls connected to the unseen threat that claimed them both, or had she unknowingly been caught in a darker web? As investigators gently covered their bodies with white sheets, the million-dollar estate fell into a heavier silence. But now, the secrets it held no longer lay buried. They hung in the air, exposed and unresolved. Gene Hackman and Betsy Arakawa's funeral mirrored the quiet isolation of their later years. No media frenzy, no glaring spotlights, just a small circle of family gathered in muted grief. Yet behind the solemnity, unease crackled. Glances darted cautiously between those present, silent questions lingering unanswered. The shock of losing both Gene and Betsy so suddenly was disconcerting enough, but the real jolt came when Hackman's personal lawyer stepped forward. The atmosphere thickened. Just months before their deaths, Gene had revised his will, not a simple reallocation of assets, but a labyrinth of unexpected financial maneuvers, obscure investments, and perplexing transactions. More troubling, however, were the long-hidden family tensions the will exposed, old wounds left to fester, now poised to tear open in the wake of loss. The lawyer broke the seal of the envelope with deliberate care, his composed voice wavering slightly under the weight of what was to come. Gene Hackman's estate, an impressive $80 million portfolio of stocks, properties, cash, and shadowy investment accounts, was divided in a way that left the room stunned. Nearly 40% went to Betsy Arakawa, his wife over 3 decades his junior. Hackman's 3 biological children shared a mere 20%, a figure far below their expectations. 10% went to an arts education charity, a decision that raised no suspicion. But it was the remaining 30% that sent an icy wave through the room, a substantial sum buried in a cryptic trust, inaccessible for a decade, its beneficiary left unnamed. A tense, uneasy silence followed. Why the mystery? Who was meant to claim such a large share of Hackman's legacy? And most pressing of all, what had he been so determined to conceal? Who was the unknown beneficiary, and why had Jean arranged his estate with such deliberate complexity? The lawyer's explanation unraveled a crucial detail. Because Jean and Betsy had died almost simultaneously, the exact sequence of their deaths couldn't be confirmed. According to New Mexico inheritance law, when no clear order of death can be determined, it's as though both parties passed away together. As a result, Betsy's inheritance didn't transfer to her own family. It cycled back to Jean's estate. In an instant, the landscape of the inheritance changed. The three children, originally left with a modest 20%, now had a claim to a much larger portion of the estate. Yet, it wasn't that straightforward. Betsy, whom they had never fully accepted, remained an inescapable presence, her influence etched into their father's will. At the funeral, they held their emotions in check, faces composed and unreadable. But in the privacy of the lawyer's office, long-buried grievances, simmering resentments, and years of unspoken betrayal erupted, transforming Gene Hackman's final legacy into a battlefield of clashing interests. Leslie Hackman, Gene's eldest daughter, finally broke the strained silence, her voice wavering between grief and bitterness. "Betsy was never our mother. Don't expect us to act like she was now." David, Gene's second son, gave a sharp, hollow laugh. 40% to a woman who never gave him children, while his own blood gets crumbs? Unbelievable. Their words hung heavily, carrying the weight of years, awkward holidays, strained small talk, and Betsy's failed efforts to bridge the gap. To Leslie and David, Betsy had always been an outsider, the woman who entered their father's life when he was already a legend, when the wealth and fame were long established. To them, she'd been fortunate, a beneficiary of timing more than love. Yet for Gene, Betsy had been his anchor, the person who stayed when the spotlight faded, when the industry's applause quieted to silence. Had he genuinely trusted her, or had those carefully crafted clauses in his will masked deeper doubts? The truth, it seemed, lay hidden with the unknown beneficiary, waiting to be revealed, threatening to unravel everything they thought they knew. As investigators sifted through Gene Hackman's financial records, they stumbled upon an unexpected revelation: anonymous investment accounts connected to industries far from the glitz of Hollywood. Despite never publicly expressing interest in cryptocurrency, Hackman had significant stakes in companies focused on artificial intelligence and biological data. Yet the most startling discovery came from a recent, discreet transaction. Just weeks before his death, Hackman had quietly funneled nearly $2 million into an offshore account in the Cayman Islands. Why would a retired actor, approaching the twilight of his life, suddenly move such a substantial amount? Was it a calculated investment, a protective measure, or a last effort to conceal something he knew he wouldn't have the time to fully explain? The mystery deepened. Had Gene Hackman been involved in something far more complex than anyone had realized? Or was this the final unspoken chapter of a life spent in the public eye, yet never fully known? Leslie sat motionless in the car, her gaze fixed yet unfocused, as silent tears slipped down her face. Her grief ran deeper than the loss of her father. It was the shattering realization that the man she had idolized, the father who once shared popcorn and movies with her on quiet Sunday afternoons, had lived a life veiled in secrets. The warmth of his presence had concealed a labyrinth of hidden accounts, enigmatic investments, and financial maneuvers that felt more like a riddle than a legacy. "Maybe we never really knew him," Leslie whispered, her voice barely audible over the steady hum of the engine. The multi-million-dollar inheritance, instead of being a bond that held the fractured family together, had become a weapon, severing what little connection remained. A vast fortune left behind, but at a price no wealth could ever mend. Gene Hackman was never the typical Hollywood heartthrob. He didn't have the sculpted looks of a leading man or the effortless magnetism of the romantic idols of his time. What set him apart was something much more elusive, an intense, undeniable presence. Hackman wasn't merely an actor, he was a force of nature, commanding each frame with performances that left an indelible mark on cinema. In the 1980s, as part of Hollywood's elite in the Glorious Seven, he stood as a king without a crown. From The French Connection to Mississippi Burning and Unforgiven, Hackman didn't just portray characters, he lived them. He was the rugged, unyielding essence of American identity, the weight of a fading dream etched into the lines of his face. Through him, audiences glimpsed the grit of a vanishing era, the slow erosion of the American dream, and the silent despair of those left behind. And then, much like those forgotten souls, he quietly slipped into the shadows, leaving behind a legacy that still resonates. In 2004, Gene Hackman quietly stepped away from Hollywood, not with a grand send-off or a defining final performance, but with a subdued acceptance. Officially, it was for health reasons, but everyone sensed a deeper truth. The Hollywood he had once shaped no longer had a place for him. The industry had transformed into a conveyor belt of blockbusters, favoring fresh faces, superhero franchises, and CGI spectacles over the raw, unpolished intensity that actors like Hackman brought to the screen. The age of weathered, commanding actors, those who could carry a film on sheer talent alone, had all but disappeared. Producers who once vied for Hackman's presence stopped calling. Directors who had admired his craft now pursued the next easily marketable star. Hackman didn't just retire. It was Hollywood that had changed, leaving behind the legends who built it. In their place stood a new machine, one that had no space for giants of his kind. After leaving Hollywood, Gene Hackman and Betsy sought refuge in New Mexico, a place far from red carpets, star-studded galas, and the echoes of a career that had shaped cinema history. Many wondered why a legend of his caliber would choose such a secluded, unremarkable life. The answer was both simple and heartbreaking. In Hollywood, he was no longer needed. In New Mexico, no one knew who he was. What began as a peaceful retirement in a luxurious desert villa slowly transformed into a gilded cage. Hackman and Betsy lived in near total isolation, their connections to the outside world fraying year by year. Interview requests, once plentiful, dwindled until they vanished completely. No Lifetime Achievement Awards arrived, no grand tributes celebrated his contribution, no final acknowledgement of a man who had once defined a generation of filmmaking. Hollywood had moved on, and the media followed, quietly erasing his name from its history books. Gene Hackman wasn't just forgotten, he had become invisible. Gene Hackman spent his final years as a ghost king, once a reigning force in Hollywood, now forgotten by the very industry he had helped define. The harshest truth was that his most powerful, most genuine performance would remain unseen. There was no script to guide him, no director to capture his essence, just the quiet of four walls, a few aging dogs, and a wife who watched the daily, silently witnessing the slow unraveling of the man she had once adored. Hackman had never feared death. He once confessed, "If I die alone one day, I won't be surprised. That's the fate of those who linger too long in the limelight." Yet his departure felt like more than the natural end of a long life. It felt like a verdict. A quiet, unyielding sentence handed down by an industry that had no tolerance for age, no space for those who refused to conform to its relentless demands. Hackman didn't simply fade away. He was cast out, punished for daring to live life on his own terms. Gene Hackman didn't die from old age or illness. He died because Hollywood had already discarded him long before his heart gave out. The industry that once celebrated him only did so when his name filled theaters, when his performances won awards, when he was a commodity worth selling. That admiration was as fleeting as a matinee ticket, cheap, temporary, and easily forgotten. When Hackman could no longer pull in box office numbers, no longer deliver captivating performances or headline-grabbing interviews, Hollywood's affection disappeared. It was never true love. It was a transaction, conditional and self-serving. His value was measured by his marketability, not by the decades of craft he dedicated to the screen. And when he became inconvenient, when he no longer fit the mold of a marketable star, Hollywood did what it always does best. It erased him. Gene Hackman wasn't an isolated case, just another name on the long list of Hollywood giants left behind when the industry's appetite for them waned. Peter O'Toole, the iconic face of Lawrence of Arabia, slipped away with barely a whisper, his death scarcely noticed. Burt Reynolds, once a box office titan and sex symbol, spent his final years battling debt and dwindling relevance. Mickey Rourke, a defiant talent who once held it all, found himself clawing for parts in an industry that had already deemed him obsolete. Hollywood's love has never been timeless. It's a transaction with an expiration date, an illusion sustained only as long as the spotlight burns bright. And when the lights fade, when the cameras stop, all that's left is a silence that echoes louder than applause ever could. Gene Hackman carried the weight of a generation. Actors who poured their souls into their craft, who defied Hollywood's manufactured mold, and who aged with dignity rather than succumbing to the industry's obsession with youth. His passing wasn't just a personal loss or a farewell for cinephiles. It was a harsh indictment of a system that builds legends only to discard them when they no longer serve a purpose. In her final words, Betsy captured the bitter truth. Gene never forgot who he was. It was Hollywood that forgot. The verdict on Hackman's career had been delivered long before his final breath. His death wasn't a sudden erasure. It was a slow, methodical fading, the industry chipping away at his legacy piece by piece, replacing him with fresher, more marketable faces. By the end, all that was left was the silence, a silence that spoke louder than any tribute ever could, a silence reserved for legends Hollywood pretended had never existed. Gene Hackman passed away on a quiet afternoon, without headlines or a grand farewell. The news of his death drifted through the media as quietly as the last years he spent in the vast, desolate landscape of New Mexico, a place where his name had long ceased to echo in Hollywood's halls. There were no national tributes, no mourning crowds leaving flowers at his gate, no candlelit vigils. Just a few brief news reports, some dry career retrospectives, and then silence. Once a cinematic titan, Hackman had become just another name lost in the fog of time, buried beneath legal documents, forgotten tax returns, and the impersonal calculations of his final will. Yet behind the paperwork, beyond the silence, there were still remnants, whispers of unfinished stories, fragments of a life that had more to tell, secrets waiting to be uncovered. Hackman's will didn't merely distribute his multi-million-dollar estate. It cracked open a Pandora's box of questions. A concealed portion of his wealth, tangled in offshore investments and obscure foreign transactions, formed a financial maze so intricate that even his own lawyer struggled to make sense of it. Why would a man who had publicly criticized tax loopholes quietly funnel assets through overseas accounts? Why, in the years leading up to his death, did he repeatedly amend his will, cutting off certain relatives, adding unfamiliar names, and directing unexplained sums to an anonymous NGO? Gene Hackman didn't just leave behind a fortune. He left a puzzle, one that grew more complex with each detail revealed. The deeper investigators dug, the more elusive the truth became, casting shadows over the legacy of a man Hollywood had already forgotten. Gene Hackman's death was initially deemed the result of old age and chronic heart disease. Yet quiet rumors began circulating in local New Mexico newspapers, a darker theory suggesting that toxic gas had seeped into his secluded home. A small yet detectable amount of carbon monoxide was found inside the estate. Investigators speculated that the aging ventilation system, while technically functional, might have slowly poisoned him, leading to fatigue-induced hallucinations and accelerating his decline. What made it all the more unsettling was that the system had been inspected just months before Hackman's passing. No leaks had been detected, no red flags raised. Was this a tragic accident, or had someone deliberately turned his multi-million-dollar retreat into a death trap? Could his tangled financial dealings have played a role in his mysterious end? Local authorities launched an investigation, but as Hollywood moved on, so did the media. The headlines faded, the speculation died down, and the case, like Hackman himself, slipped quietly into silence. Leslie stood before the cameras, tears streaming down her face, not just mourning the loss of her father, but grappling with the bitter sting of betrayal. After years of distance, she had believed they had finally found their way back to each other. Yet Hackman's final will painted a different picture. Detached, calculated, as if their reconciliation had been an illusion. When a legend falls, it isn't just grief that follows. It's betrayal, fractured families, and wounds that time can't heal. If Hollywood were a house, Gene Hackman had laid its foundation brick by brick. Yet in his final moments, Hollywood never looked back. There was no grand memorial, no dedicated retrospectives, not even a brief tribute at an awards show. Even worse, in industry circles, younger actors whispered, "Who is Gene Hackman?" The place that once revered him had moved on, its gaze fixed on new faces, marketable names, and the next fleeting sensation. Because in Hollywood, the line between immortality and irrelevance is razor thin, and Gene Hackman, once a king, had been left behind in the dust. Gene Hackman, once revered as Hollywood's unthroned king, died a forgotten man on the very ground where he had built his legacy. The industry that had once celebrated him had long since moved on, and his passing was reduced to a brief headline, lost beneath waves of trivial celebrity gossip. The stories went untold. The recordings remained unwatched. His family stayed silent. The public barely noticed. As the years slipped by, Hackman's name faded, his secrets buried alongside him, at least for now. Because in Hollywood, nothing stays buried forever. All it takes is someone with enough ambition or enough ruthlessness to dig them back up. One day, those hidden recordings may resurface, and when they do, the world may see that Gene Hackman's death wasn't just the result of age or illness, but the crushing weight of the dark secrets that followed him to the end. Yet that day remains distant. For now, the curtain has closed, and Gene Hackman, the forgotten king, haunts Hollywood as a ghost in its shadow. He is gone, his decaying truths buried with him. What he left behind was not a legacy, but a curse. A lingering echo of whispers, suspicion, and wounds that time will never heal. Will the truth about Gene Hackman ever be revealed, or will it remain one of Hollywood's greatest unsolved mysteries? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story, Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more captivating content. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.